Hey everyone, what's up? How's it going? This is Finite MTG, and today we are back with yet another Chaos Draft. I still have a few more of these Chaos Draft videos that I'm going to release. This is the last one I'm releasing without any matches. The rest will all have matches with them. Let's dive into the picks and start going over things. So, the first pick that I make here, I think, is not particularly close, but I could see an argument for the rare. So, the rare is board wipe of sorts. 2 and 2 red to deal X damage to each creature, where X is the number of creatures in play. And wraths are very strong. People tend not to play around them. However, what I've noticed with my red decks in this format is they generally want to be aggressive. So it really makes a lot less sense to put a wrath into that kind of deck. On the other hand, there's just a Pilgrim's Eye here, which is going to be a great card in any deck. Doesn't matter which archetype you're playing, doesn't matter which color combination, the card is going to be good, it's going to make your deck. The fact that the body is evasive and it gets you any land that you want is really helpful. So yeah, I could see an argument for the chain reaction, but wanted to start things off with Pilgrim's Eye here. Alright, now second pick, we have a 5th Dawn pack. Not a ton of playables in these old packs here, but fortunately we are past a Devour in Shadow. So this card is very much like Vendetta, if you know that card, but it costs 1 more black mana to cast this. And that's not really relevant. It's just a very, very nice card. Deals with basically any creature at instant speed, provided you have the life to spend on that. Otherwise, there's a Trinket Mage. You don't really want to play this with just a target or 2 in your deck, but if you can reliably play this thing as a 2-for-1, I think it can be pretty solid. There are artifact lands in the original Mirrodin, so you can play the Trinket Mage as a Civic Wayfinder of sorts there, if you're able to pick one of those up, and that's pretty sweet. But I took the Devour, of course. Now we get into pick 3, and some nonsense is abound. We see the rare is still in the pack. It's a Gigantha, the Wellspring. And it's not just any rare, it's a companion. So what that means is pretty much you can start with this thing in your sideboard, and then during the game, pay 3 mana and put it into your hand. But you do have to meet a very specific requirement in order to have this thing in your deck, which is you can't repeat any mana symbols in the mana costs of your spells. So Gigantha, just a solid card as a 5-mana 5/5, leaves you open with that nice red-green hybrid symbol, but being able to tap for WUBRG is a pretty powerful effect, and at this point, you know, I have that Pilgrim's Eye. I'm starting to wonder if maybe I can do some 5-color Shenanigans. Otherwise, Boneyard Lurker, another very strong card. Wild Wander's okay. I think before probably either of these, I'd be taking a Rumbling Rockslide. But yeah, very surprised to see a Gigantha here, 3rd pick, and definitely encouraging to try to do some silly stuff. Speaking of silly stuff, we immediately get rewarded with a great 5-color payoff here in Paragon of the Amisha. 2 and a white for a 2/2 with first strike, and if you pay WUBRG, cost that the Gigantha happens to tap for exactly, then basically you get a Baneslayer Angel until end of turn. And yeah, this is a great payoff. We're set up here to try to do some really, really silly stuff. And so, yeah, I snap up the Paragon. I decide that I'm in for wherever this ride is going to take me. All right, so next pick here. Couple decent green uncommons. 4-mana 3/3 has lifelink if you're kind of in one of the Abzan color pairs. 7-mana 6/6. I don't like that this thing only manifests if something is blocking it. It would be nice if it got to do that if it was blocking something as well. And ultimately, I don't have a ton of experience with the 5-color deck. I know fixing is going to be a very high priority for me, and it's already just a very high priority in Chaos Draft as we picked that Pilgrim's Eye first. So yeah, I pick up this Blossoming Sands now over the nice green uncommons. Alright, in this pack, there's not a ton going on here. Prized Griffin is one of those cards that I think gets underrated a lot. 5 mana 3/4 flyer is fine, and in Chaos Draft that's actually probably above rate. But at this point I'm more interested in a Crashing Drawbridge. I'm going to be playing a defensive deck. I want to keep my curve low. It's nice and easy to cast. Speaking of easy to cast, remember that Gigantha prevents you from repeating mana symbols and the costs of your cards. So the difference between the Devour in Shadow that we took second pick and Vendetta, which costs 1 black mana less, is actually a pretty huge difference. Because if we companion the Gigantha, we can't actually play the Devour in Shadow. But we do take the drawbridge here. Alright, next pick. This is another old pack with not a ton of very good cards. 6 mana 4/4, and it says each other attacking Kavu, which means it doesn't count itself when it attacks. Strength of Night is an okay trick. I don't think I've ever seen the kicker really be relevant. Jaded Response, fine sideboard card. Kavu Glider can be okay if you're blue-red. I imagine Soul Link is okay, though not very good. But at this point, I'm just trying to prioritize fixing, so I ended up taking a Helionaut. And yeah, I thought this card was pretty terrible when I saw it before. Still think it's very bad, but figured, hey, if we're desperate for fixing, we'll take what we can get. Alright, so now in this next pack, we see another Tarkir pack, and there's a Naturalize, which is not a card I want to main deck, but it is just a fine choice for the board. Otherwise, one of the cards that I like here, and kind of a neat trick, is that this thing does repeat a mana symbol. You can see multiple green pips in that Megamorph cost, but Gigantha only cares about symbols repeating in the actual mana cost of the card. So Herd Chaser Dragon, totally fine pickup for what we're trying to do. 3 mana 2/2 that can flip into something pretty big is nice. It plays both sides of the curve, which is kind of what we're looking for. Alright, next up we have a couple totally fine kind of medium cards here. Corrupted Zendikon, decent in the aggressive decks. Unlike the Genju cycle, the Zendikon cycle only returns the land itself. The Genju cycle returns the aura enchanting the land to your hand. There's also just a Snapping Creeper here, another fine card for Chaos, effectively 3 mana 2/3 Vigilance a lot of the time. But I opted to go here with the Ricochet Trap, the card with the highest ceiling. This card is amazing against removal spells, also counter spells. It's not super easy to get this to work against removal, because with counters you get to pay the 1 red cost pretty often, but removal, you're going to have 4 mana up most of the time. Still, I think this card is pretty cool, and I'm willing to try it out in this kind of deck. Alright, now a pack comes around where there's just about nothing. The Devour in Shadow is really the only good card the first time, and now there's just like a 5 mana Demolish pretty much. So not thrilled about this card. The instant speed is something I might board it in against a bomb, but kind of cancels out the Gigantha too. So definitely not trying to play this card. Alright, next up here, still have a few playable blue cards in the pack, and we took that Wall from Throne of Eldraine fairly highly, so I'm going to be similarly happy here to pick up an Aegis Turtle. Just looking to set up some blockers that are relatively easy to cast until we can pull off our Shenanigans. Right now we only have 1 payoff for the multicolored stuff, but the Turtle is, yeah, just a fine way to preserve our life total. Alright, next up here we have Bonesaw, not a card that I'm really ever excited about, but sometimes makes my more aggressive decks. Otherwise, there's a Tukatung Thalid, not a card I really ever want to play either. But there's also a Sludge Strider. At this point, I only have a couple artifacts. I have the Pilgrim's Eye and I have that Wall. But if I am able to pick up some more artifacts, especially artifact tokens, that kind of thing, I could see this thing being pretty strong. It's one of those cards where Gigantha can tap for most of the mana cost, which is kind of neat. And I decided, you know, what the heck, might end up being able to do something with that one. Now in this pack we have sort of the creature form of a Lava Axe here. Not a card I really want to play if I'm not hyper aggressive. Otherwise, there's a Smoldering Ifrit, another card that I almost never want to play, just period. Then there's Archers of Karsi. This is not a card I'm excited about, but right now we're kind of low on ways to interact with flyers. This could just be a curve filler. Remember, we're leaning pretty defensive, so we don't mind having just another creature with Defender in our deck. Here we can take a Giant Opportunity. This card is quite bad. I don't want to play it. And we get a last pick Dragon Arch, which is kind of spicy because it does dump any multicolored creature into play, but chances are Giganta will be one of our most expensive ones. So with that, moving on to pack number 2. So here we get, looks like a Gate Crash pack, ton of multicolored cards, ton of fixing. You see the 3 Clue Stones and the 1 Guild Gate. So a lot of tempting choices here. So I'm looking at first to try to figure out what the most powerful card might be. I'm looking at Debt to the Deathless, which you might remember is uncastable or unplayable with a Giganta in the deck because we're repeating white and black symbols. So then I'm looking over at our rare. And something I learned, and I actually learned this mid-draft through Google while trying to make this difficult pick, in my opinion, is that Catch and Release is also not a card you can put in your Giganta deck because the red symbol is repeated. It's not repeated on Catch twice or on Release twice, but the fact that it is there on the card twice prevents this thing from going into the main deck if Giganta is your companion. So with that, I ended up just taking the fixing that I thought was the best, which was the Guild Gate. Most people don't have a lot of respect for Clue Stones, so I wouldn't be surprised if we're able to wheel one, maybe play it, and I think the Guild Gate is just a solid pick for us. Alright, now in this pack, we have a couple really nice options for a deck like this. Divination, we would love that kind of effect. Tracker's Instinct's kind of similar to Divination, hoping this one could wheel though, because it does require someone to be in green and blue to get the full value out of it. There's also just a Scorned Villager, card that's a little nicer in aggressive decks, or just kind of a red-green stompy deck than what we're trying to do, because it doesn't fix for our colors, it only ramps. So I end up going here with a Rack with Madness. The kind of deck that I'm playing right now really wants removal spells. We already had to give up on the Devour because it's double black. A lot of other removal spells are going to have multiple of the same symbol as well, and this thing is really nice. It can answer pretty much a creature of any size as long as you know, the power is greater than or equal to the toughness, and yeah, I like it. Alright, now in this pack, it's kind of tempting to take the Blighted Fen, but it also feels like taking a colorless land when I'm trying to do some 5-color shenanigans is probably a terrible idea. There are a couple other cards that I'm interested in here, but surprised and pleasantly so to see this rare still in the pack. 2 mana 1/1 haste is nothing to write home about, but being able to tap to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, and any color, I mean, those are pretty important words for a 5-color deck. However, only being able to play creature spells off that mana is annoying, but if nothing else, maybe this ramps us into the Giganta. Alright, now in this pack, there is a Whisper Silk Cloak, a card that I tend to think is very good in general, and, you know, would probably be taken here normally, but we already established that we have to pick removal very highly with this deck to try to stay alive, and this is really not a cloak style deck, so it's a pretty easy essence drain for me. Kind of surprised to see this good of a card still here at this point in the pack. The fact that this can end a game if the opponent is low on life, not to mention gaining us life, is almost always going to be relevant for this style deck. Just happy to pick this effect up. Alright, now in this pack we see a bunch of gold shenanigans, nothing with the symbols repeated this time, which is super nice, which means we could play any of these cards. But I'm still trying to pick fixing as highly as I possibly can, which means that it's going to be a Wildfield Border Post for me. Yeah, I like some of the other cards in this pack, but none of them are particularly great, so I'm not too unhappy about taking the Border Post here. Alright, speaking of multicolor cards, there's a nice one for us here in the Esper Charm. We already mentioned that we would love some divination effects, and that's pretty much what this thing is a lot of the time. Sometimes you can blow up an enchantment, but I think you have to be really far ahead if you want to mind rot your opponent. But keep in mind this thing is instant speed, so that is a pretty rare effect, the old instant speed mind rot. Otherwise, bone splinters if we really want removal, but I don't think we do. Quasali Ambusher was another option. However, I think that Esper Charm is just a stronger card, so that's what we went with here. Alright, now in this pack, don't love any of these cards. They're all kind of mediocre creatures, but I end up trying to go with the one that I think our deck could use the most. So 2 mana 2/3 that can't attack is something that we would think about playing. We are leaning defensive, and slightly overstated creature is nice. 5 mana 4/4 is really whatever. We have a lot of powerful stuff to do once we get higher on the curve. But 6 mana 3/3 Lifelink Explore is actually pretty good because we don't have a ton of ways to gain life right now. We have that kind of Baneslayer Angel effect, but being able to stabilize with an expensive, albeit powerful card is something that we're looking for. All right, next up here, don't have anything super powerful in the multicolored cards, but we do have a couple nice ways to use our excess lands in the late game, thanks to Retrace. Monstrify is a card that I think is very strong, but you have to be obviously in a pretty aggressive deck to make use of this. If you're able to turn lands into forcing your opponent to chump block with it, then you're in great shape. But Raven's Crime I think is fine pretty much in any deck. I like how cheap it is. I like that, as a controlling 5-color deck, we do want to be able to get any counter spells and that kind of nonsense out of our opponent's hand. And because we're going to be playing so many mana sources, would not be a surprise to see some excess lands in our hand. So 2 of the cards we were thinking about before come back around to us here, the Catch and Release and Debt to the Deathless among them, but of course we cannot play either of those. We have an Azorius Cluestone, which is ramp fixing and a way to get a little deeper into the deck if we don't need ramp or fixing. But there's also a Morgue Burst. And this card is a good deal of value. It's not quite a 2-for-1 because it doesn't return the creature to your hand, puts it back on top of the library. But 6 mana, removal, and set up your next draw is really not too bad, again, for this kind of deck where we do have a lot of ramp, and at some point our creatures probably will get killed by a more aggressive opponent, and then having a removal spell would be nice. So yeah, I elect to go with the Morgue Burst over the Cluestone there. Now we see this pack come back around. 3 mana 2/2 First Strike could be okay. I don't like how difficult it is to cast. I like this combat trick a lot, but not for the kind of deck I'm playing right now. And Torch Fiend is just a fine sideboard card that we could consider main decking here if we're low on early plays, especially early plays with power greater than 0. So yeah, Torch Fiend I think is a fine choice. A little surprised to see it go that late. Now in this pack we just take the card that I think is most powerful, which is the Mortuary Mire. Though I don't really think I can play it. It's not a huge cost to the mana base to have 1 land that enters tapped. We're not going to have creatures in the graveyard all the time. Some of the time we're going to be using them for Morgue Bursts anyway, so just think that this card, while decent, may or may not make the deck. Now we get to this pack, and there's really nothing going on here. We ended up going with the Scrounge. Just a very corner case kind of effect, but potentially more powerful than the other stuff here. All right, next up. So if you remember, kind of toward the end of pack 1, we got that Sludge Strider, that card that cares about artifacts entering and leaving the battlefield. We pick up another artifact here with the Aethersworn Shield Mage, another artifact creature in particular that prevents damage that would be dealt to artifact creatures we control. So I like that this thing kind of has some 2-way synergy with the Sludge Strider. It triggers it when it enters the battlefield, and it can prevent the damage being dealt to the Sludge Strider, and of course to the Shield Mage itself. I think this card in general is just pretty underrated. If you think about it like a Quasali Ambusher kind of, then it seems a lot better in my opinion. So yeah, happy to get a card that I consider playable that late. Here we just take a really terrible blue card and 15th pick land. All right, so now we have this card, which shows up as a mythic, but no mythics in the original set. This thing's a rare, and you see another rare right next to it. So you guessed it, that means that one of them is foil, and guess which one it is? It's the Tarmogoyf. It's foil, and it's a Phantom Chaos draft, so we have to pass it, because unfortunately this thing is just not going to be very good in our deck. So I end up going with the River of Tears here. The Whipspine Drake I am looking at and I'm liking, and then I remember that it's unplayable with the Gigantha thanks to the mana cost, and same with the Sporloth Ancient. So I don't think River of Tears is amazing fixing. It's kind of a complicated card to play. You have to think about when to play your lands every turn, which is just kind of an extra unnecessary step in an already very complicated game, but I like the card well enough, so ended up going with that over, say, like an Infiltrator Ilkor. Alright, this pick was extremely hard for me. There's so many good cards. There's a Bloom Hulk, which doesn't shine in this particular deck, but it's just very good in general. There's a Spark Reaper, which is just a huge overperformer. Pretty much any deck with a bunch of creatures. One of those cards that I think you should pick extremely highly, even outside of the original set, because you don't need in-set synergy for this thing to be good. There's also just a Sunblade Angel here, which is an amazing finisher. Maybe should have been my pick. I don't know about that. At this point, I'm thinking that I need to take fixing. I need it really highly. I'm not thinking about having necessarily a ton of different ways to close out the game, just trying to make sure that I can reliably cast all my spells. So I go with the Centaur Nurturer here, which was very good in the deck, to be fair. I don't think it's like a clear-cut mistake to take it over the Angel, but both of these cards, or either of these cards I should say, would have been amazing in the deck. Alright, next pick here. Things are slowing down a little bit. We have another multicolored set, except the multicolored cards in this particular pack are pretty bad for us. Glowspore I think is just bad in general, and the True Fire Captain is just not something we can put in our deck. There's a Guildgate, there's a Locket, but I end up going with the Urban Utopia here, which I believe to be better fixing than the land or the Locket. I like that it's a cantrip, and we're probably going to be a little heavier on green than the other colors anyway, so I think it's fine. Now in this pack we have Tendo Ice Bridge, which is really bad fixing. We have a 5-mana 4/4, which is a solid card for Kamigawa, but still unplayable in our Gigantha deck. Kind of a funny land in the God's Eye. Phantom Wings, a card that I actually like a decent amount for the versatility. You can use it as a bounce spell, play it as a sorcery, and then use it whenever. Or you can use it just to give the creature flying like it says on the card. But I ended up going here with the First Volley. Over the course of this season, I've learned that this kind of effect is something that I want to main deck. Even though it doesn't look particularly potent, you're almost always able to trade this kind of thing. That's just pretty much enough for me here. I like having some early interaction in this deck. So now in this pick, we have a really, really nice land in the Memorial to Unity. We have a 5-mana 3/2 kind of mana war, but can only bounce your opponent's stuff. Pretty much never going to cost less. But remember, there's a Mishra's Self-Replicator. We have the Aethersworn Shield Mage. We have the Sludge Strider in terms of historic spells. And Gigantha itself is a historic spell. So I think this is exactly the right kind of deck for the Self-Replicator. It's just this kind of slow but grindy way of turning a game around. If our Baneslayer Angel style effect gets killed, then the Self-Replicator should be able to do a lot of work for us. So not a card that I played a ton of in the original format, but I think it should do really nicely here. With that, moving on to this pack, We see just 4 mana 4/3, not super exciting. How about a 4 mana 0/2? Well, it does make a 3/2, but still not super great. Bad defensive options like a Wailing Ghoul or 3 mana 3/2 Vigilance, which is playable but not great. I end up going here with the Oath of Liliana. I really do not love Edicts in Limited, but we did just pick up a card that cares about historic spells. And just like the Gigantha, the Oath of Liliana is historic because it's legendary. It's not a saga, but it is legendary. And so that is enough reason for me to take it at this point. And yeah, I'm going to try to main deck this card. All right. Now in this pack, we have a little bit of tension. There's just a fine 4-drop here, card that I really like in the aggressive decks. There's a great land, which we would pretty much want no matter what. But if you recall, we've been taking fixing really highly. We're a little low on playables at this point, so I end up opting for a strategic planning, if you kind of excuse that opt pun. I think this card is decent. Hopefully it's not going to mana screw us permanently by putting lands we need into the graveyard, but I think just having some flexibility in a deck like this is pretty important. Some card filtering to make sure we get all of our colors and find some action in the late game. All right, next up here, we have a bunch of good options. This was another really tough pick. I'm not sure I made the right choice. So we have a 3 mana 4/4 that requires us to crew it. Remember, we have multiple creatures with 0 power, so despite being an artifact, which is nice for the self-replicator and nice for the other stuff we have, I'm not a huge fan of having a creature that we can't really animate. Otherwise, there's an Ether Chaser, just a very good card in general. Unfortunately, not historic though, which means it's not going to trigger the self-replicator, even though it does make an artifact for the other 2 artifact synergy cards. Speaking of artifacts, there's a Welder Automaton, not a card I particularly like, but a card that could be fine, and a Hinterland Drake. But I end up going here with the Bastion Inventor. Not sure how often we'll have a cheap artifact to improvise this thing out, but we do have a bunch of ramp, and just having a nice hexproof threat, which can also block pretty well, is something that I value pretty highly here. If we can reduce our vulnerability to removal by playing this hexproof creature, that'd be amazing. So I really like that from this pack, even though, again, it was a really tough pick. Next up here, we have a Henchfiend of Ukor. We have a Delay. Both of these cards I think would be totally fine, though I think the Delay would be best in a tempo style deck. Cutthroat also good, but better in an aggressive style deck, so I end up going with the Henchfiend here over, say, something like a Salt Skidder, a card that I do like but just does not block very well or very often. Now in this pack, our theme of creatures with much higher toughness than power continues as we take a Teo's Light Shield. I feel like this kind of card would be nice in the green-white decks in M21, but I ended up taking this thing here just because I figure, hey, it's worse than our other defensive threats, but it can technically attack, especially if you put the counter on it, and just might be something we're interested in. Next up here, we get a very nice late Boros Guildgate. Really happy to get a little bit more fixing here. Not thrilled to pass Ledev Guardian, another fine defensive card for us, but I think the Guildgate is just exactly what we're looking for. Now in this pack, there are really no playables. I think I take the Child of Thorns. Don't really remember. Doesn't matter. None of these cards are ever going to make my deck. Now in this pack, we get a 2 mana 2/2 back card that is playable, but we're not very heavy on red, so that's awkward. Also, this thing might trade a little too often, might turn on the opponent's shock style effects a little too often as well, but we do end up taking it here. I think it's a card that we could play. We get a Strange Augmentation, 14th pick here, and a land 15th. All right, so this is how the deck ended up. Of course, Gigantha is in the sideboard as the companion. You can't really see that from here, though. Had some weird stuff going on, relatively speaking, with the artifact synergy, but I thought the deck was pretty good. I thought that despite not having a ton of experience, there weren't too many picks that I really could have done differently. And yeah, we did get a ton of fixing, which was super nice. The deck ended up going 2-1. I was pretty disappointed to lose in the finals to a deck that I didn't think had a higher power level. Also a little disappointed that I never got to go off with the Mishra's Self-Replicator, but the Paragon of the Amisha that we got 4th pick right after the 3rd pick, Gigantha, they were just amazing together. Just play the Gigantha, play the Paragon, tap the Gigantha, activate the Paragon. Won quite a few games. And yeah, so that is what first picking a Pilgrim's Eye can lead you into. I hope you all have enjoyed this video, and I hope you're looking forward half as much as I am to my next Chaos Draft videos, because I have some really, really sweet stuff coming up for you guys. So yeah, with that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.